March Madness, it's time to step aside. I love what they have available on their website currently, a March Madness style bracket for their new format. This is a massive 8 weight classes, 8 fighters per tournament, 32 fights to pick from. They're offering a massive bracket where you can go ahead and try to predict the outcomes, the champions in a March Madness style bracket. It's the only way to describe it. I pride myself on doing significant amounts of research. In this case, with 32 fights, all sorts of athletes coming from different backgrounds and professional experience levels, I'd tell you not to tail these bets, but we're going to be picking the entire PFL bracket today. We have former UFC athletes, top quality Bellator athletes, and then a nice mix of what the PFL had been doing with their roster and their global series tournaments to get us to this point now. So without further ado, let's jump straight into some of this action. Starting with the men's bantamweight division. Now, I'm not too sure if the Bracket Challenge website does reflect the actual fights that we're going to be getting. It does seem to match up with topology, but it does go against the bantamweight roster that they also have listed on their website. Nonetheless, the reason I bring that up is because one of the fighters I was most excited for, most confident in, was Ali Taleb, who won PFL Mania. He is not included in the Bracket Challenge, and from what I can see, he is also not in the World Tournament at the moment. Now, again, this probably could change. I don't doubt it. When it comes to fights and why a bracket like this might be tough is because of all the shifts and stuff like that. But for the sake of the Bracket Challenge, I will follow as per what is offered on their website. So looking at this current webpage, we'll break down the fights and who I believe will win this 8-man tournament. Bantamweight is one of those really interesting divisions for the PFL this year, starting with Leandro Higo versus Josh Reddinghouse. I think Higo is going to be really the boogeyman in this tournament, and it's ultimately going to be up to one of these fighters to try and knock him off what I'll guess is going to be a consistent favorite line throughout all of his fights in this tournament. 13 submission wins. He has a wealth of experience in Bellator and ultimately gets the benefit in being in one of the weaker all-around tournaments. I'll take Higo over Reddinghouse in this spot in the main event of the second night for the PFL. Jake Hadley is probably the second most experienced in high-level mixed martial arts situations. However, most of his consistent success was at flyweight. He lost as a heavy favorite in the final fight for the UFC at his weight class, and he'll be a bigger athlete in his first-round matchup at the quarterfinal, so I'll give him the nod against the Brazilian, but I have him falling to Higo in the semifinal. On the other side of things, quarterfinal number 3 features Justin Wetzel. He is the biggest bantamweight in the tournament and is training under Corey Sandhagen. You can actually see some of the same stylistic tendencies between the two fighters. Wetzel is a clear dark horse here in my opinion, and I think he'll have competitive fights against any fighter in this tournament. Kasumov, on the other hand, is a Russian grappler. He wants to get you up against the fence. He wants to overwhelm you with constant grappling pressure. He'll win if he can control Wetzel, but I actually think the American has enough stylistically where he can get this fight won. It'll be close, and if Wetzel isn't active enough, this pick could look very dumb after the fight because Kasumov definitely has that Habib grappler style, but I do think Wetzel, the Colorado native, gets it done in this spot. Then in the final quarterfinal, Francesco Nuzzi, who comes from the PFL Europe, takes on, according to this bracket, former Contender Series and Ultimate Fighter prospect Mandu Gutierrez. I didn't love all of Nuzzi's performances on PFL Europe. Mokhtar Benkachi smoked him before it was ruled a no contest. However, he does have wins over UFC fighters Bernardo Sopai, and he is 10-1, so he can clearly win fights, and I'll take him in the quarterfinals, but I don't think he has enough to get past Colorado native, and that'll make Justin Wetzel my second finalist. Then in the final, I do believe Bellator standout Leandro Higo will ultimately win the whole tournament in a highly competitive fight. I in no way think Justin Wetzel will be washed in this fight, but I do think in a close fight that will probably end up at a decision in my opinion, I think Leandro Higo gets the job done. The men's welterweight division also has a lot of top-level fights. Jason Jackson versus Andrei Koreshkov is basically a Bellator main event set up to main event opening day of the tournament for the welterweights. Jason was basically the king of 170 pounds at Bellator at the time of the PFL merger. Losing in his last fight on the Champion Series, I can't get out of my head the massive upset he had against Yaroslav Amosov. And overall, in this fight, I do believe Jackson's hungrier, more explosive, more athletic, and all around more ready for this moment, in my opinion. I think he gets it done over Koreshkov. Magomed Umlatov versus Logan Storley is... There was a shift since I made my bracket. Logan Storley is now taking on Joseph Luciano. I have Logan Storley winning this fight. I will break down the other two quarterfinals, but then I will have Logan Storley meeting Jason Jackson. I think Jason Jackson will defeat Logan Storley. I love his athleticism. I love the explosiveness. I do believe Jason Jackson has all the intangibles to win this tournament. I'm taking Jason Jackson. Then, for all intensive purposes, the last two quarterfinals are really two prospect matchups. The first features a Greek fighter, Giannis Bachar. He had a short stint on The Ultimate Fighter. He won a Cage Warriors title with a first-round knockout. Has a lot of power in his hands. He was also a regional champion in other European organization. And he takes on Japanese fighter Masayuki Kikuri. Masayuki has shown off to the world in his last two bouts in Bellator. The Japanese fighter is skilled. He fights with a high IQ, but pairs that with an exciting fighting style. He's a former Pancrase champion, and I'm going to take him here. Then in the other quarterfinal on the other side of the bracket, 17-2, Russian takes on an athletic finisher. Though personally, I think Zhane is missing the experience. I think he'll ultimately stop Berkamov, who since appearing in Bellator and the PFL has been less than impressive. But Thad is going to need to be ready for the grappling because the Russian does bring that to the table. And even with that in mind, again, same story as the last one. I don't believe either fighter has the capability to defeat Jason Jackson on his current run. So I'm going to put Jason Jackson in the final. Brazilian Gabriel Braga versus Canadian, debuting to the PFL, a champion in his organization in Canada, in Fred Dupras. And to be honest, Fred is extremely impressive. He's 8-1 with 8 submission victories. He has a 100% finish rate, but then again, he has not been fighting the same competition as Gabriel Braga. Now, Braga has been a top PFL contender since he started in the organization. He has competed at the highest level. He's lost, he's won, he's done it all. I really did look at Braga as an impressive prospect and a potential star for the Professional Fighters League, but he has faced some bumps in the road. And Dupras actually surprised me. His takedowns are relentless. It's not easy to have 8 submission wins on your regional scene. Again, doing it in organizations a little bit less than the highest level regional organizations like the Legacy Fighting Alliance. He's done his major work in Samurai MMA. So questions are still there, but from his tape, relentless takedowns, he's going to look to get this fight to the mat. And I do believe that he could have some success in this fight. Braga is not the greatest when he's forced up against the fence, but I am going to stick with the experience of Gabriel Braga in this spot. Jesus Pinedo versus Adam Boric. Boric is the Bellator guy here. Jesus Pinedo was a great PFL fighter in their regular season last year, the season prior. I am going to go with the Bellator fighter here. Pinedo does overwhelm opponents. I think the 3 rounds does favor Adam. I'm going to go Adam in this spot to meet Gabriel Braga in the semifinals. Then Mavlid Abulayev versus Jeremy Kennedy, the Canadian who has experience in the Ultimate Fighting Championship. I'm still going to go with Abulayev. I think the Russian fighter in this spot has been tested more over Jeremy Kennedy. I do think Kennedy can put him in some dangerous spots, but at the end of the day, I'm going to go with the Russian. And then finally, Irishman Nathan Kelly takes on South Korean Tae-Kyun Kim. Nathan Kelly, training under John Kavanagh, suffered a tough loss against Akhmed Magomedov in his last fight, ultimately being out-grappled in the contest. Nathan Kelly is extremely dangerous everywhere. He can find submissions, his clinch striking is nasty, and he's a very well-rounded mixed martial arts with no preference really on where the fight goes. Kim, on the other hand, will compete in only his 2nd fight in the last 3 years. He's competed in Brave Combat Federation. He's got an exciting stand-up style. I love to watch his fights. He's also well-rounded. Again, another guy with not a strong preference whether the fight stays standing, goes to the clinch, or gets to the mat. And in my opinion, this fight is going to be an absolute banger. I'm going to go with Nathan Kelly here in my opinion. I've seen more of him against top-level competition. And with the semifinals set, Braga versus Boric, I believe that Braga is just a little bit worse than Jesus Pinedo. And with Adam defeating him in the quarterfinal, I couldn't do justice to seeing Braga defeating Adam in the semifinal. So I have Adam going on to the championship. And Mavlid Abulayev, I'm going to speak to him in the semis and the finals. I'm not going to pick against this guy until I see him concede inside the octagon. He hasn't up until this point. I believe that he is going to be the featherweight champion this year. Mavlid Hablayev, barring falling out of the tournament, in cage action wise, I think he wins it. I'm going to look at the sole women's division for this year, the women's flyweight division, starting with the first fight, Talia Santos versus Juliana Velasquez, a battle of two Brazilians. I'm going to go with the former UFC fighter. Talia did very, very well in the PFL tournament last year till she ran into a potential superstar in Dakota Ditcheva. But I do think in this less than stacked flyweight tournament, I do believe Talia is probably going to be favored in all of her fights. I'm going to go with Talia Santos in her first round matchup, then Kana Watanabe versus Jenna Bishop. Bishop actually has a lot of the same story as Talia Santos, but Bishop actually ran into Dakota Ditcheva earlier on in the tournament last year. I'm going to go with Jenna Bishop here. I think she has a lot of talent in the grappling. Then on the other side of the bracket, in the most lopsided of first round matchups, a former UFC fighter. I get it, she's getting old, takes on really a regional fighter. I'd argue probably doesn't deserve to be in the tournament, but I'm going to go with Liz Carmouche pretty handily here. And then finally, my dark horse for this tournament. Now, I have her going that far. Alora Dana out of Brazil, jungle fight champion. She packs a lot of power. I do believe that she can go further than I have her. I have her going outside the first round, but I do have her falling to the experienced Liz Carmouche in the semifinal. Alora could get the job done. Alora is younger. She's a champion in the regional scene. I do believe her skill set, she can definitely go on pretty far in this tournament. Just the UFC background. Liz Carmouche's age is another question, but UFC background is nothing to that. I'm going to go Liz Carmouche to the final. And Talia Santos versus Jenna Bishop. A lot of the same story. Talia Santos coming over from the UFC. I think she is the best flyweight in this tournament. I'm going Talia Santos. And then a rematch, Liz Carmouche, Talia Santos. I think it goes the same way. I'm taking Santos to win the women's flyweight tournament this year. Moving on to the lightweight tournament. We got a lot of familiar faces here for Bellator fans. We'll start in the top left. Alexander Shabliy takes on Brent Primus. I do believe the Russian gets the job done in this fight. I think Brent is getting a little bit past his prime. He was competing with Michael Chandler back in the day. Great American fighter, but I do think Shabliy possesses the skill set to get the job done. Clay Collard takes on Alfie Davis. I'm going to take Clay Collard. He has been really fighting well inside the Professional Fighters League. I don't think the quarterfinal matchup is going to be enough to knock him out of the tournament. On the other side, Gaji Rabadonov. I do believe Rabadonov is the favorite coming into this tournament. He takes on former UFC talent Mark DeCasey. I'm going to take Gaji. I couldn't say that I believe he's one of the better fighters in this tournament and not take him in the quarterfinals. I think that he can dominate really this quarterfinal matchup. And then Mads Burnell versus JJ Wilson. I'm going to take Mads Burnell. I just know that he's a little bit more experienced when it comes to these top level fights. Then going to the semifinals, I'm going to take both Russians actually here. I'm going to take Alexander Shabliy and Gaji to meet in the main event. I do see myself picking a lot of Russians within these brackets. It's because they have a skill set that favors predicting them. They could definitely be caught in a one-loss tournament. My predictions could be way off, but I am going to go with both Russians. And then in the final, I'm going to take Alexander Shabliy to win the PFL lightweight tournament this year. Middleweight is probably the division I'm most familiar with when it comes to these fighters. Taking a look at the first round matchups, UFC fighter Imka Kasagnai and a PFL world champion takes on Britt Fabian Edwards, the brother of Leon Edwards. This is a great first round matchup in my opinion. Fabian could definitely be in the UFC, competing at the highest level. Imka Kasagnai was in the UFC, has been dominant since leaving. He's returning to middleweight after fighting at light heavyweight for a couple of his last fights. I'm going to go with the Brit here, actually. I'm going to take Fabian Edwards. I think that that's going to be an upset on the lines, or this fight's going to be pretty close. I do think Edwards has a lot of the talents like his brother does, and I do believe that Edwards gets the job done. Then Josh Silveira, I have a career highlight video on him if you want to go check that out. He takes on Mike Shipman. Josh honestly hasn't had the PFL career that I thought he would. I thought he'd be a little bit more dominant. In terms of the first round matchup, I am going to go with him here over the Brit. That's just my opinion. I do believe Josh has a great skill set in mixed martial arts. Again, it hasn't been as impressive as I thought it was going to be in the Professional Fighters League, sadly, but I do think he gets the job done in the first round. then Murad Ramazanov. I think he's going to be the favorite, and it hurts to pick against the Canadian Aaron Jeffrey. I hope Aaron Jeffrey wins, but I do think Murad is probably the best fighter in this tournament. I'm going to take him to win it all. Little spoiler ahead, but I'm going to take Murad in this first round. And then Sadabusti versus Dalton Roast. I'm going to take Dalton Roast moving on to the semifinals. I think Fabian Edwards gets past Josh. Fabian is extremely talented. I think he just needs to put it all together to earn a victory here. I'm going to go with Leon Edwards' brother, Fabian Edwards. And then I'm going to take Murad Ramazanov again in the semifinal. Again, unless he gasses out, I really thought he was going to be a top-level PFL fighter. He lost to Shamil Musayev last year, but I do think that is the only middleweight that's going to defeat Ramazanov in the PFL. I'm taking him in the semifinals, and that takes us to the final. I'm going to go with Ramazanov, another Russian winner in the middleweight division. That is my opinion on the middleweight. Light heavyweight and heavyweight are by far the worst two divisions in my opinion. Here are my picks for light heavyweight. Here are my picks for heavyweight. I have Alexander Romanov, who honestly didn't leave the UFC on a losing streak or anything like that, found his way to the PFL. I think he is going to win the heavyweight tournament. But those are every single PFL weight class tournament predictions. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you enjoyed, remember to smash that like button, subscribe to Combat Sports Central, and I will see you in the next one.